So, today, we're going to try and piece together a theological puzzle that has fascinated people for centuries. We're talking about the rapture and the resurrection. How in the world do these two massive events actually fit together? Let's dive in and see what our source material suggests. Here's the big question at the heart of all this. Think about it. You've got saints from the Old Testament, you have believers from the early church, and you have Christians living right now. All of them are promised a resurrection. But does it all happen in one big single event? The answer, as you'll see, might not be as simple as you think. All right, so to start cracking this puzzle, our first clue is found at a really specific moment in time, the very end of a chaotic 7-year period on Earth that's often called the tribulation. There's a key passage from this period that is basically the key to unlocking this whole thing. Now listen to how specific this is. The Apostle John sees a resurrection, yeah, but it's not everybody. It is a very, very particular group. Folks who were martyred for their faith during the tribulation. That little detail, it's absolutely crucial. And that right there is the core of the problem. If this is the big resurrection event, where is everyone else? What about all the Old Testament saints, the apostles, every believer who lived and died before this period? For them to reign with Christ, they have to be resurrected at some point. So, if it's not here, then when does it happen? Well, this is where things get really interesting. The source text we're looking at suggests that this apparent gap isn't an oversight at all. Instead, it argues we should be looking for two separate, totally distinct events. So what if we've been trying to cram everything into one single event when the Bible is actually describing two? The source material makes the case that we're looking at the resurrection of these specific tribulation martyrs, and a completely different event for everyone else, an event we know as the rapture. Let's just put them side by side, because when you do, the differences really pop. The resurrection we see in Revelation happens after the tribulation. It's only for the martyrs from that period, and it takes place right here on earth. But the rapture, described over in 1 Thessalonians, is argued to happen before the tribulation. It includes all believers from all time, and they meet Christ up in the air. See? Totally different scenarios. Okay, so let's follow this train of thought. If the rapture of all past believers happens before the tribulation, how much time passes between that event and the resurrection of the martyrs after it? Well, the source points to one key number to understand the timing: 7. And to get why those 7 years are so important, the source uses this really beautiful analogy from an ancient Jewish wedding tradition called the Sheva Brachot. For 7 whole days after the wedding, the bride and groom would just celebrate their new covenant together, this period of complete, uninterrupted joy. So here's the connection, and it's a powerful one. Just like that wedding feast lasted 7 days, the church, which is often called the bride of Christ, is said to spend a 7-year period in heaven with Jesus. And this incredible heavenly celebration would be happening at the very same time as the 7-year tribulation is unfolding down on earth. Okay, so this framework starts to give us a pretty clear timeline, right? The rapture happens, then 7 years go by, then the resurrection of the martyrs. But this whole idea immediately bumps up against a really tricky question, one that comes from the very specific wording in the book of Revelation itself. And this is the big one. It feels like a total contradiction, doesn't it? If millions of believers were already resurrected and taken up to heaven 7 years earlier in the rapture, how on earth could this later event be called the first resurrection? It just seems to defy basic logic. But the source material has a very specific explanation for this. The argument here is that maybe we're just reading the word first the wrong way. It's not first as in 1, 2, 3, a chronological sequence. It's first as in a category or a type. This first resurrection is a catch-all term for everyone who is saved and gets to enter Christ's 1,000-year reign. It's called first to make a sharp contrast with the second resurrection, which is for the unsaved for judgment. Okay, so once we get our heads around that idea, that first means a category, not a count, all the other pieces of the puzzle can start to click into place. We can finally see how every single believer from every era is accounted for. So let's walk through it step by step according to the source. First up, the spirits of the Old Testament saints were taken to heaven when Christ descended. Then, at the rapture, their bodies are finally resurrected and they're joined by all the believers of the church age. They're all perfected together. Then you fast forward 7 years, and the tribulation martyrs have their own resurrection on earth. And just like that, all 3 distinct groups are present and accounted for, ready for that millennial reign. All right, time to put it all together. Let's look at the whole sequence, the complete timeline that our source material lays out to solve that puzzle we started with. Okay, here it is, the whole shebang laid out from start to finish. It all kicks off with the rapture, when the church and the Old Testament saints are taken to heaven. That event starts the clock on the 7-year tribulation on earth, while those saints are in their wedding celebration in heaven. At the very end of that 7-year period, Christ returns to earth, the tribulation martyrs are resurrected, and, with every group now finally united, the 1,000-year millennial reign can begin. So, when you look at it this way, the solution to the puzzle really hinges on this idea. The rapture and the post-tribulation resurrection aren't the same thing. According to this interpretation, they are two distinct essential steps in the plan to bring every believer from all of history together. You know, digging into all this leaves us with a pretty big final thought. No matter what specific timeline you believe, it brings up a powerful question for all of us. How does what you believe about the future change how you live your life right now? That's something really worth thinking about. Thanks for joining me.